Thesis statements. A thesis statement is probably the most important sentence that you are going to write in your paper, and I'm not really exaggerating on that point. A thesis statement is that central, unifying idea of your paper. It is the answer to your question. It is the statement that affirms or defends the specific idea that will focus or organize your paper. Now, I kind of like to think about thesis statements as shish kebabs. If you're not familiar with them, here's a picture. Now, if the meat and the veggies on a shish kebab are like the arguments of your paper, the thesis statement is the skewer, the stick that goes through each and every point of your paper. This thesis statement is going to tell your reader precisely what the paper is about, which is why it's incredibly important that you get that thesis statement clear on the front end. Now, in my experience, a thesis statement should be four things. First, it needs to be specific. You can't just generalize about a topic, and you certainly shouldn't just be rephrasing the question that your professor gave you. You want to be narrowing into the specific focused idea that you are going to be analyzing or arguing about in your paper. Second, a thesis statement should be arguable. You can't just say something like, "That wall is blue." It's not a good thesis statement because it's wrong, but also because it's just a statement of fact. If everybody already agrees with your thesis statement, it's not a good one. In fact, I've even heard it said that the best thesis statements are ones where you could argue the exact opposite and still be able to write a paper, because that means you have an argument that you're trying to get across. Third, thesis statements should be interesting. And yes, I know that there are going to be times where you're writing papers for courses that aren't your favorite. I won't tell your professors, I promise. But even in those classes, it's going to do you much better if you can find a topic and a thesis statement that is interesting, that engages you, because interest is infectious. If you are interested in what you're writing about, your readers are going to pick up on that. And finally, a good thesis statement should be defensible. By that I mean it needs to have support to back it up. You can make a thesis statement that's about your opinion, but if you don't have anything to back that up, that thesis isn't going to do very well. So make sure that you have a thesis that can be supported with evidence. Now, a couple more tips about thesis statements. If you haven't figured it out already, every single paper that you write in university has to have a thesis statement. End of discussion. You don't want to just be going in loosey-goosey without any clear ideas. You need that sentence to clearly communicate to your reader, this is what my paper is about. It's going to help your reader and your professor have a much better idea of what you're trying to argue. Now, typically, a thesis statement will only be one sentence long, and it will often be found at the end of an introduction, but this isn't necessarily the case. Some disciplines, like philosophy, like to put the thesis statement earlier. And sometimes, as the papers get longer, you might even have a 2 or 3 sentence thesis statement. Just make sure that you aren't substituting quantity for quality. Your thesis statement needs to be clear. And for the sake of clarity, I'm going to say it again. Your thesis statement needs to be clear.